Hello, and welcome to Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. This is the first of hopefully many case studies about extraterrestrial contact and alien abduction. I am sharing my own personal stories and histories here as a way to kick it off. So, how this will work today is I'll provide an introduction. I'll go through a bit of a preamble, actually, about how we can relate to extraterrestrial stories. How I'm inviting you to relate to these stories. And then I'll go through different phases of my own life and about how contact has unfolded and my current understanding of that contact. And finally, I'll end with a set of conclusions that's more like a set of hypotheses that I'm inviting you to consider. So my name is Daniel Rekshan. I am from northern Michigan. I live in Canada now, and I work as a hypnotist and dream worker, supporting people with extraordinary contact experiences. I hold a master's degree in East-West psychology, a bachelor's degree in the Western liberal arts, a certificate in the spiritual counseling modality of depth hypnosis, as well as a certificate in beyond quantum healing. So I've really made it my professional mission to gain enough credentials to work in this field and to help move it forward. And that's really showing fruit. I have written the chapter on lucid dreams as a contact modality for the CCRI follow-up book to the Beyond UFOs. This is called A Greater Reality. That's coming out in March 2022. And I also engage in a scholarly exploration of hypnosis and dreams through the study and practice group at Cosmic Dream Sanctuary, which you can interact with online. I run a weekly service Sunday mornings to deep dive into these things, and I periodically will run local in-person CE5 groups. I'm also the chief dream officer of Dreamwell, which is a public benefit corporation, and we have a mobile app that supports people in mindfulness, dreams, and their dreaming practices. So that's a little bit of an introduction to how I'm relating to this field, and we should now get into the preamble. So why share stories? Why am I sharing this story, my story now, and why might you want to engage with that? Well, I'm sharing this story actually today because of an experience I had earlier this morning, and I was simply relating with the Reddit community about extraterrestrial contact and alien abduction. And there was just a vague interaction. Someone shared their story, and I go, oh, wow, that revealed something to me about the nature of this world. But then also, I wanted to share my story, and I realized that I haven't had a single place where all of my experiences have been expressed. You know, I shared my story on Connect the Dots podcast, on Merkaba Chakra's podcast, and Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, but not in a single way, not in a linear way, which is what I wanted to do today. It's been very, very, very helpful for me to consume other people's stories about ET contact, about dreams, about this world. I think we feel really lost when we don't have each other's stories to work with. And in that way, that's one of the reasons why we might explore stories. In this field, in the case of ET contact and alien abduction, stories are immensely important because of two reasons. One is there's not a lot of great stories. There's a lot of media notions around this. There's this sense of oh, the Pentagon doesn't understand what UFOs are, or, oh, they're scary and they'll take you. There's a lot of misinformation about this. In fact, when we look at the Beyond UFOs study, we see an overwhelming sense of positive interactions. They interviewed something like 4,500 experiencers of this phenomena and discover that 70% or more, maybe even 90% have had positive experiences, and that 70% is overwhelming positive. So check out those numbers in Beyond UFOs to really see the actual things, right? When you survey a population, what's themes come out. So it's important that we share our stories, even if they're not sensational. Like mine are not sensational stories. I was not abducted by evil reptilians. I was not saved by Pleiadians. I was not, I didn't have an experience of, say, terrifying genetic harvest or anything like that. It's really, I had some very potent dreams whose sources are outside of this human body, and that have specific messaging, and that's it, right? That's it. And there's not a lot of data behind it. It's not something where I'm trying to convince you, but it's really my own personal story. And I think most of us actually have these sort of fringy stories. We're not really sure what to do with it. So that's one of the reasons why we're sharing this story. I'm sharing this story now. Another reason is that as we share stories, it wakes up each other. We wake each other up by telling our stories. I can't tell you how many times someone has shared their story with me and I go, oh, wow, huh, I had something like that happen. I just didn't have a framework to put that in. So the invitation today is, as you listen to my story, to be scanning your own life, your own memories, see what feelings come up. And as feelings come up, allow imagery to arise. And you don't have to understand what the images are. You don't have to have a worldview that says aliens are from Zeta Reticuli and they come here in ships. You can just be open. Life is something like a dream. And so that's, and these can be dream-like events, and you don't have to consciously understand things before admitting them into your experience. And that's really the invitation here. So how might we relate to extraterrestrial stories? Well, let's relate to them like dreams. This isn't to say that they're false by any means, but rather that we should respect them like we respect someone sharing the dreams. We understand that when you share a dream, you are giving something magical away, or you're relating in a magical way, because dreams somehow are beyond our waking consciousness, and they actually do have the capacity to tell the future, to share messages between people in dreams. You can dream yourself out of your body and actually see physical things where you can gain information about this world that you normally couldn't have through dreams. So we understand dreams invite us into a deeper, a greater reality, and that our conscious mind is somehow squashing a very deep and multidimensional experience into a linear story that can be communicated in words. So that's what when we share dreams, that's what we're doing. And that's sometimes problematic. And that's one of the reasons why we don't invite like direct interpretation of other people's dreams, right? If someone shares a dream, you don't go, oh, you've got the Oedipal complex. You should go see a psychotherapist, right? That's not a really respectful way of working with dreams. Nor is saying, hey, this didn't happen to you, right? This wasn't a physical event and therefore it didn't happen. You receive a message, a communication, a story about dreams in a very open-handed sort of non-judgmental way. And that is how we should be relating to extraterrestrial contact stories, especially in our lives, especially as we share our stories, right? We have this fascination with making them historical events. And I'm here to say that they may be actually very real historical events, but they may be events that stand outside of our historical perception of space-time. Really, just like our dreams are much more vast than our waking consciousness, so too these encounters with extraterrestrial beings may actually reveal deeper aspects of our world that cannot fit into our historical 3D, like linear time understanding of the world. And so we're actually invited to listen to stories in a non-judgmental way without having to go, that was a historical event, this is what this means about my world, right? Just be open to it, right? See what it means, just like you might with dreams. I need to talk about the term alien abduction, and this is again something like dealing with ET stories like dreams, right? We as a culture really want to identify and categorize things. And alien abduction is a relatively new term. It's a relatively new term and is a very charged political term. And it has a lot of stereotypes that have been reinforced through media, right? So when we have these experiences, right? Like I had the experience of beings coming from a closet, taking me to a different realm, putting me back and messing with my memory, basically, right? Like, so those are symptoms of what we might call an alien abduction experience, right? And the mind really wants to know. That's part of our intellectual mind is categorization and saying this is that and that is not that, right? So when we go, oh, I had this experience, I want to know what it is. Oh, it's alien abduction because we have the stereotype from media. And so our mind goes, yes. So I actually invite everyone I work with to set aside that term unless it does, in fact, unless you have actual memories, right, of being taken against your will, right, by extraterrestrial beings, then we don't actually know what the thing is. There are a set of symptoms associated with it. This might be marks on the body. This might be strange dreams. This might be seeing UFOs. This might be scared of the image of gray aliens. But we don't actually know what happened to you unless you yourself tell us. So we should not actually use stories from the media, right? Stories from Hollywood to interpret our experience. Just like when we start practicing meditation, we might have experiences of telepathic communication. We might have experiences of past life memory coming in. We don't think, oh, because I saw that in a Marvel movie, in the Doctor Strange movie, now I'm becoming a wizard or something like that. So too, the invitation is to just be present with our experience and to have a sense of distance from these cultural narratives that really flatten a multidimensional experience into a stereotype. So that's the invitation here with the term alien abduction. Even though I'm going to tell you about experiences that are stereotypically alien abduction experiences, the invitation is to hold them or understand this to be something like a dream experience, something like a contact experience. Another important thing to talk about before we really get into this is hypnotic regression and memory. So again, a lot of our information about extraterrestrial contact actually comes through dreams and hypnotic regression. As it turns out, hypnotic regression is a terrible place to get memories that about physical historical events. I mean, it helps. You can refresh the memories. Sometimes it's very, very effective. But it's sort of like using a psychic for a murder investigation. You only turn to a psychic unless when things don't work in the normal sphere, right? And they might be picking up a tremendous amount of different information than what's happening here because they're accessing a multi-dimensional reality that needs to be flattened before it comes into the consensus worldview. So too with hypnotic regression and these sorts of memories that arise from hypnosis, we don't say, right, oh, I had a hypnosis and therefore I had a memory. That's not actually how it works. When you look at the literature, there's a lot of literature supporting the notion that hypnotic regression does not necessarily lead to effective memory retrieval. But it does, however, lead to, there is a sense of hypnotic suggestibility that does work. There is a sense of capacity for extended human capabilities within the hypnotic state. And the way I understand this is we have a dream-like experience, right? We can call for dreams to come to us that provide healing, insight, and transformation. And through that, we might use the hypnotic state to have an experience that provides insight. But we are invited not to concretize that experience into a historical expression. Like I have a hypnotic regression I'll talk about going into a hypnotic regression about an experience I had when I was about 14 or so. I'm not saying this actually happened physically, but that the experience was meaningful to me in such a way that I continue to work with those characters involved with that experience, right? It helped me find peace about what was happening to me. And when we flatten all of that multidimensional richness of our soul, of our heart, of our experience into history and historical objective events, we are creating a false image of something that was much deeper. We don't know what those experiences are. I can't actually tell you what those experiences are now. And I'm standing here kind of awkward in that, but that's really the limit of our mental epistemology. That's the limit of our capacity to communicate with concepts and words about objective historical events. As it turns out, the world is not historic, nor is it objective, so it's really not a problem. It's only a problem to those people who are fixated on one very thin level of egoic, conceptual, intellectual activity that we've actually fetishized as a culture. And so the invitation is to let go of that and be present with yourself in a multidimensional and almost story narrative-like way. So with that, let's get into some of the stories. So when I was 3 years old, this is some of my earliest memories. Is when I was 3 years old. I lived in a house by Lake Superior, and it was a 2-story house. And I lived with all my brothers. I have 2 brothers, one older brother, one twin brother. And we lived in a big room as children, as 3 or 4 years old. And I remember lying on the bed, and my bed was right in front of a closet. And I remember looking up at the closet and knowing that that was actually a portal. It's a portal, and beings came out of it. Beings came out of it and took me. That's what I knew. And I remember covering my head, saying, if they don't see me, then it won't actually happen. Then that experience isn't possible. I mean, and so I worked with that. I worked with that experience, and I called them vampires actually because, and I remember thinking about this, and I remember searching my mind for the closest representation I've ever seen to these things, and turns out it's the Count from Sesame Street, and these beings had large foreheads, big eyes. They didn't really have ears. They had a pointed chin. And you might even imagine them to be the stereotypical gray. They were bigger than me, but they were small things. And they invited me through, or took me through this portal situation. Right. So, I called them, in my head, it was vampires because that was the closest image I had. Since then, I did do a kind of a regression experience on that. I needed to figure out, when I'm working with people, I was like, I have to actually do a self-regression, have a regression experience on these. And the information that came through in that regression was that it was a terrifying experience for me as a child. And they did bring me into a different realm. They took me into a ship, and I remember going through a portal there in a tunnel, and then there's a beautiful, there were perhaps a dozen or 2 other children. There's, a half dozen little grays watching us, and there were toys and these little things that moved around and beautiful colors and things like that. And it wasn't a scary experience. However, the information came through that I wasn't in this timeline. I was not allowed to understand or remember the experience of going there and coming back. All I was actually allowed to remember was going there. And once I went through the portal within the closet, I don't remember anything. I'm back in my bed. I'm terrified because I remember seeing these strange creatures. And I didn't actually go with my memory through and have that beautiful time with the other children, really. So that was one of the major insights I had from doing a regression. I thought I was going to have a terrifying experience because of the nature of the vampiric imagery that I had unrightly associated with these little grays, right? I was scared of that. So that was one memory. The other memory I had I'm again around that time, I had talked to my mom about being scared at night, and she put uh, a sticker, a transparent sticker of a rainbow and a cloud and a sun, and she says, if you ever get scared at night, you can look at this and remember that God loves you and will support you. And so I remember looking at this sticker on the window and out onto the front yard. I see a thing come in from the street and is walking kind of slowly to the door. And I know something is there. I see it, but it's sort of like looking at a mirror into a mirror, or it's sort of like a kind of oil on water type experience. It's like a mirage. It's kind of there, not there. It feels almost like what you might imagine looking at a black hole is, where the light is spinning around. And I go, what is this? I remember not knowing what this figure was, not actually being able to see a physical form, but knowing that it's there. And I ran through all the different options in my head as to what this is. And I came to the notion that this must have been the Easter Bunny. And as I ran through these notions, I remember a sort of shifting quality, a shimmering quality to it, pulsating with these different imagery. And came to the position that, yes, Easter Bunny, that's an agreeable image. And as it approached the door, it established more and more that imagery of being Easter Bunny. And this is a really interesting way of perception, because there were two levels of perception. One is I'm still physically seeing the challenge experience, the challenging thing to see, right? The density, that shimmer quality thing. And then the other is a very agreeable story and imagination for my mind. It said, you can see this if you want. And I remember even coming to it's almost like an agreement between myself and this being, that it had a little bow tie, like you might imagine with the Easter Bunny, that you might have seen, that I might have seen as a child, that sort of thing. So that was another experience, and I share that experience because it is corroborated by my family. I said, "Do you remember me seeing the Easter Bunny?" My mom said, "Yeah, that was so funny. You saw it. It was real. You were very insistent." My brother said he didn't understand why I was lying. It's out of character, but it's such a ridiculous thing. And he didn't understand that. So there was really a sense of testimony that I did have a real experience there, and that it did involve the perception of an Easter Bunny, although that is sort of exemplary of a screen memory experience. So that was from when I was 3 to 4 years old or so. The next memory that I want to talk about is when I'm around 14 years old, and so I was an awkward child. I was introverted. I liked books. I had a hard time relating to my classmates. You might actually resonate with that if you're listening to my work, and that's totally fine. Or you might not. That's totally fine. But during this time, I had a radical shift of personality, or not personality per se, but what I did, how I was. I really became very particular about certain things, and I became a vegetarian at this time. I was very strong about that idea. I started reading a tremendous amount of books about philosophy, religion, and UFOs and aliens, right? So this was the time when the internet was coming out. There were GeoCities, and one of my first websites I built was a repository of knowledge about ET contact and UFOs. I started having really potent dreams at the time. I started being very obsessed with the image of the scarab beetle, of Egyptian mythology surrounding that. I had a lot going on there that just was from who knows where. That was the start of my potent dreams. I had a lot of potent dreams around that time, and I need to talk about one that's really challenging, which is with a reptilian being, right? So I had these, before that, I mean, I had these like lucid dream type things. I had these experiences of simulation. I remember praying to God. This was when I was in the evangelical church, the Baptist church, to pray to God to not send me to hell. I remember I had this whole pattern. I would etch a symbol in, a symbol of the cross with the infinity sign on my third eye to seal away anything that was terrifying at night. And I had these rituals. It was very potent. When I started learning about alien abduction, I was both terrified and attracted, both terrified and obsessed. And so I did a lot of research, and then there were these times where I was just scared. I had some things like missing time dream type things, but really the only thing that I can point to is a sense of suspicion, a sense of intuition. And I do have physical memories of going through the abduction symptomology list and going, I have this, 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 I have this. I don't actually have physical marks on my body. I looked around. It's like found some scars that I didn't have memory of getting, but going, oh, I could have gotten this falling down or whatever. So I have those memories. I worked with that. And I haven't really found peace about, that sort of thing. I mean, it was years and years. It's like you just stop thinking about it because it drives you crazy. You can't get to an answer or something like that. One of the dreams I do want to talk about is when I was probably 14 or 16, somewhere around there. I had a dream right around actually the time that my parents saw a UFO visit the house. Which increased this activity. The dream was on the beach. So we lived on this beach house, and then on the beach, that was a place where it was a potent like encounter dream space. I would sometimes have this giant lady come and teach me things there, but in this series of dreams, a reptilian being, and I didn't actually realize it was reptilian until recently, but it had green scales, right, and teeth, and it was like very, very present and potent dream character. It would sort of like torture me. It took me there. It roasted me alive and ate me alive. And I thought, I remember having that dream, but it wasn't until recently when I started working with others that I realized that this is a stereotypical reptilian encounter dream. So I had to get to the bottom of that. I ended up doing a self-regression around this. I started studying the MyLab style abduction, thinking that was related, something like that. And I started relating to people on the internet and to offer regression hypnosis, and I realized I really needed to go into that dream particularly because it was scary. Because it was scary. And so what happened was I recorded a hypnotic regression script. I listened to it and I had an experience. As soon as I started the regression script, the experience was I'm in this hospital room. I'm in this hospital type room and I'm strapped to a bed. I see about a half dozen military and lab technicians, and they're doing stuff. There's like a little computery thing. There's rooms that have windows, actually, that they can see through that are like conference rooms. And I look down and I'm actually gigantic. I'm in a gigantic body. I'm in a reptilian body and I'm looking out. As soon as I recognize this in the dream space, a wisdom, a sense of intelligence starts to communicate with me. And this is the reptilian actually speaking to me. And he just explains it to me like right away. It says, okay, you're visited by a UFO. Your family saw the UFO. That happened, right? The UFO came. It is related to the Pleiadians. The Pleiadians were checking in on you because you're a starseed. You come from a line of humans that have been sort of tended by these Pleiadians to increase your psychic capacities. That's great. So it said the reptilian said he was working with the K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base, which at the time held nuclear weapons. It held stealth bomber. He said they worked, and that this image that he's presenting to my mind, being in that body, was underneath, really deep underneath, and is connected to the like secret portal system underneath there, the secret tunnels. He says that, and he says that he's part of this sort of he's there because there's nuclear weapons there basically, and he's sort of this psychic radar system for them, but occasionally they'll go out and have experiences or experiments. They were particularly interested in me because of the UFO visitation, and so they decided to do this experience of kind of psychic abduction of me as a starseed being, right? The reason why he's strapped down is because he didn't really know how it was going to go. So that in the sense of being consumed alive in the dream, it is actually the abduction of my consciousness from my physical body to this reptilian body, basically. So something can happen so that they can have an experience, so that they can, I don't know, like program me or do something. I'm not quite sure. And I actually haven't delved into that. So that's something that would be interesting to do. Anyways, at some point in time, there was a shift, feedback cycle between the reptilian and me. This is what the reptilian is saying to me. He's saying, okay, so you in the future will take a vow, the bodhisattva vow, to be of service to others. And one of the examples is to be of a bodhisattva is someone who allows, if there's like a hungry tigress, there's a story that came up, there's a hungry tigress, the bodhisattva might actually offer his flesh to feed that tigress. This isn't recommended actually in bodhisattva practice, but it's one of the stories, a teaching story. And so it's something like that where I had this vow in my head to this strong orientation towards service to others. And there was this feedback cycle that woke this reptilian up. As it turns out, we are both star-seeded from the same star in the Pleiades. This is what he says, right? It's going to sound ridiculous to some of you. It's going to make some sense to some other of you. The sense is that there are many, many different races coming out of the Pleiades, and the star seeding of my consciousness comes from an initial star consciousness. It's not the Tijetans, it's not the Nordics. These are earlier or younger races, actually. In this sense of star seeding comes from solar consciousness. They're very clear about that. It is consciousness that comes from one of the suns there, and it has this sort of branching pattern to it. It branches out through multidimensional reality, multiversal reality, and it works primarily in the layers of dream, which is why I'm sensitive in that way, is what it says. So this branching consciousness incarnated in the Alpha Centauri system, and there's a reptilian society there that was oriented toward kind of like service to self, but it wasn't so aggressive as some of the other reptilian races, and they perpetuated themselves through a cloning system. They have eggs that come out. They live in dens, sort of thing, and they worked from the second to the fourth density in this sense of effective immortality, and so then they're part of this like greater empire, and part of that was being here present. So he was, as a military officer, essentially upholding the empire in colony state, essentially. And he is in the fourth density, meaning there's specific psychic capacities. They can navigate different realms. We're just coming into that with a sense of manifestation, with a sense of out-of-body experience, and so forth. Anyways, this is getting pretty into some strange lore, and thank you for being here, and thank you for understanding this story like a dream. This is a dream story. This isn't, I'm not telling you a history of what happened, because we are going outside of the 3 dimensions of history, the 4 dimensions of history, right? And we're working with different densities and dimensionalities. Anyways, so we're star-seeded from the same solar consciousness in the Pleiades. He's over here in Alpha Centauri, comes to Earth, is working with the military to do whatever they're doing. He has this consuming experience, this abduction experience of me. He encounters this feedback loop that wakes him up. He's like, this is me, right? There's a mirror experience happening. It wakes him up. He says he goes for an aeon to a distant planet to practice, to meditate, to really, he had an ontological shock here and went away and then came back, and he is now initiated actually in the priesthood of Asclepius. Essentially, that's what he says. He says it's not, we don't call it that. You can call it that. You can think of that like this. It's effective. So he is essentially here and back present in my life. We've worked together in creating a space, of sacred space, of dreaming, of healing, things like that. And he's now vibrating in the 5th density. That means deeply embodying peace, love, and unity consciousness. He's about to ascend into the 6th density, but needs to address what happened in the 4th density and the karma there. So he's here. He came back into work with me, particularly in order to address the karma of those abduction experiences and doing the dream and kind of hypnotic work of the psychic reptilian kind of presence in the so-called abduction phenomena. Anyway, so this is all happening in a regression experience. This communication happened in a split second. And I open up to it. I go, okay, wow, that's really potent. That's really interesting. And I relate to this being. This is an experience that inspires me to forgive the empire that I grew up in, that of the United States, the American empire, that has perpetrated misinformation, that's coercive, that does mind control experiments on its own population, that engages in war, that's highly aggressive, that traps us into systems of destruction of environments, right? These are all very real examples of empire. And the experience I had with this reptilian actually inspires me to develop the capacity within myself to forgive all of those aspects of empire and to really come into a state of personal responsibility about how I participate in this empire experience, what my role in terms of destruction of environment is, right? Like my participation in genocide, actually. And by being in this society, I somehow enjoy the benefits of the genocide of the indigenous people. And that's a horrible thing to do and say and be, but I have to acknowledge that the roads, the straight roads and the rectilinear cities that we have built here in colonies, right, in a colonistic effort, really are built on genocide and slavery. And we have to acknowledge that. And this psychic connection, this regression experience, even though it's dreamlike, inspires me to do this work. It inspires me to acknowledge that reality happened. So is meaningful to me, and that's why I'm sharing it. There's one other regression experience I want to talk about. So I did dream incubation. Dream incubation is basically saying I have an intent. I want to have a dream, a memory, an experience that addresses this intent as I sleep. So I had that experience, and I was like, what is going on actually about when I was 14 years old? What caused that shift? What was that encounter? And so I woke up from a very interesting dream experience in response to that intention, that dream incubation experience. I woke up from that and I had a potent memory. It was a potent dream space. It was the psychic connection. It wasn't a dream. It was a psychic experience that happened in dream space. And For those who know what I'm talking about, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who don't, I invite you to just think of any time where you've had a wish fulfilling dream or like a processing of the daydream and compare it with the most significant dream you've ever had. And then you'll know this sort of difference I'm talking about. And you know the difference when you wake up from it. Everyone who has ever had these dreams go, I know the difference. So in the dream, again, I'm presented with a very simple dream-like scenario. I'm in a ship. It's a UFO, although that's a stretch to say that because I only see a mental representation of it. I'm in this room. It's sort of like a docking bay. It's sort of like the back of those ships that have the doors, you see them like cargo helicopters or whatever in movies where they have that door that opens, you go in and there's like a space where you can do work basically. In that space, there's a table, a bed. It's a medical bed. It's kind of small. It's about, I would say, something like 8 feet by 14 feet. Up to the side, there are an elevated walkway with a door, like a window, like two one-way mirrors, basically. And I sense actually 3 beings there. I sense grays. I sense gray aliens, and they're there watching, right? And along the walls, there's these medical things. And so this is the scenario. This is the dreamlike setting where the psychic communication happened. So this is information, but we have to interpret it like a dream. Was I on that ship? I don't know, but it is relevant to me because the imagery says, yes, it had something to do with the genetic harvest program. It had something to do with medical checkups. It had something to do with the gray aliens. Totally fine, right? But I don't actually know. There's no evidence for it. I don't have marks on my body. I don't have implants, whatever. So at the bed, there's this being, and he looks to me like a very gentle, kind man. And he is the actual source of the dream communication, of the dream scenario, of all this information coming in. This being is the source of that. And I look around and actually he's like, oh, I see actually a very kind and gentle image. And this is actually the image of a janitor I had in like elementary school who was just nice to kids, right? He seemed like a kind of an authority figure that was gentle and kind. And so he has that guise. And I look in the dream space, in this psychic communication space, and I realize that I'm not actually seeing a humanoid. I'm not seeing a kind and gentle man. There's a field of consciousness between me and this being that invites the agreement that this is what I'm perceiving. It is not actually I'm perceiving it. There's actually an invitation to sort of agreement on this perception. Very, very, very similar to the experience I had seeing the Easter Bunny and agreeing with that being that this was the mental representation. And coming to that knowledge, right, I realize I'm looking at something like that Easter Bunny, the shimmer quality, this sort of density quality, this sort of sense of looking at a black hole with light turning around it. That's kind of what it was like. But it is a gray being, right? Like it's a gray alien. There, and it's communicating with me, and I know that it is the one entity in this team that has the compassion and the training to work with humans. The rest of them don't. Forget about it. They're observing, they're interesting, but they don't have the actual training to relate to us in an effective way. So there's one guy that basically welcomes you into the ship, helps you with the procedures happen, they bring you out, right? So he's sitting with me like a doctor might sit with a patient after a procedure saying, are you okay? How's everything settling? In the memory, this feels like an actual memory that he's taken up in the dream experience, right? So this is hard to track. And again, one of the reasons why we talk about it like dreams and not like historical events. This is very important. And I'm sharing this experience because there's a lot of information coming out, But I'm not saying that I physically sat with this thing and it told me this and now I'm in a memory of that. This is a dream experience I'm talking about that happened 2 years ago that has reference to when I was around 14, 15 years old. So, all that information comes out. He's like a liaison with the humans. He's checking in, seeing if how the post-hypnotic suggestions are laying in, right? Like there's an agreement. He's seeing how are the perceptions working, right? Because they don't actually want me to have this memory. I don't actually want me to have these memories. We come to an agreement together that whatever we agree upon is like beneficial to us, and that he's here now, in this, presenting this memory to me. He says, you're capable now of receiving this intuition or this deeper dimension of the memory, right? You can actually perceive through the hypnotic suggestion, through the sense of agreement that this was a gentleman, that whatever, right? Like, and to the actual perceptions of what it is. And I would say, based on this memory, that our understanding of what grays are, right? The spindly arm, big-eyed, android type beings, this may or may not actually be the case, right? We may actually understand them to be more like wave forms, and that we're particles, they're waveforms. They can be both, and we can be both. But right now, in this density, we're something like particles. And in order to interact with particles, we need another particle, right? Like in order to see and be conscious of it. But they might be actually more like waveforms. We don't actually know. And that's the kind of inquiry that I want to engage in, right? I want to see, what am I like in a waveform? What are they like as a waveform, right? Because we understand consciousness in a different way than we did back when I was a kid. So that's one story of regression around there. And these are allies to me. These are psychic allies, let's say. These are beings that show up in my dream life. These are beings that show up in my psychic communications with the world. And we know, right, from the CE5 experience, which we'll get to later, that it is a psychic phenomenon. We shouldn't beat around the bush anymore in pretending that it's not a psychic phenomenon, that we're, it's like how many more studies do we need of parapsychology saying like, wow, look, actually any sample of the population is telepathic slightly more than chance, right? Like we should extrapolate that data to go, oh, there's a real signal here about psychic capacities, psych capacities. What would a society look like if we focused on building those for a millennia or two, right? Like we might have something like the Greys. That's just a bit of an aside. So thank you for being with me in hearing the stories of my memories from when I was about a teenager. I want to move on to a story of contact when I was 19 years old. This is a very interesting story with me because it is a perfect screen memory experience. So I started practicing. I said my prayer to be of service to others in alignment with my destiny and desire, which is ET contact. That's what it is. I'm really amped about it. I'm really amped about the possibilities here because of these stories, because of the potential, because of the stories that I've read in the history of the Western canon. 3,000, 6,000 years ago, as long as there's been writing, there's been stories being told about this. So I want in on it, and that's part of my prayer. I started working with someone who had a lot of synchronicity with me, and this is common actually when you read stories about hypnotists and hypnotees, that sort of thing. It is common that there are synchronicities that arise up and out of that. It's called high strangeness, and so that high strangeness here is there's a tremendous amount of synchronicity. This person also has essentially the name of the city my brother was living in, my twin brother, and this person comes, he comes to me and says, I have this memory. I was driving outside of a major city. It's not like ET stuff. I just know something's behind it. I was reading John Mack, who's a hypnotist, and this came up. This came up for me. This memory came up for me, and I need to get to the core of it. And so he was driving from a major city to the outskirts, and then had this experience of going through this weird kind of liminal space, and then seeing a being that was like a dog that was kind of weird, and that was it. But I was like, wow, the synchronicity. I remember when I was 19, my brother and I were on a road trip, and I had a very similar thing, driving outside of a major city, having something like a screen memory, seeing like a dog, and then, going into that. So when I was 19, my brother and I went on a road trip from Michigan to California to see the Great Redwoods. And so we go through Minneapolis and we stop at a diner to make a call to our parents, say, hey, we're fine. We're passing through Minneapolis. We're just going to drive to the plains, let them know how we are. The diner itself was kind of like a 50s style diner. It had psychedelic art. Like, it was weird. It was a weird diner in general. We didn't eat anything. We didn't drink anything. We just had the phone, used the phone basically. And then we left. The next thing that happens is very, very strange. I don't have any memories between the diner and this next thing. I don't know how I got there. We sort of got in the car. We started driving. And then all of a sudden, I'm in the car, my brother's driving, and we're driving through a construction zone. We're on a very straight, long road, and there's what seem to be these construction barrels, the cones, the lights that are flashing. It's just so bright, I can't keep my eyes. It's sort of like, whatever. I remember just having my head lolling like this and going, I'm so glad my brother's driving. And it's such a strange sense of consciousness. I was here and there, this sort of thing. I made contact with my brother. We're twins. There is something like telepathy. I don't actually remember saying words to him, but I remember having a mind-to-mind communication, which seemed natural at the time, to be honest. It seemed very natural to have a communication without words. And we said, we don't know what's going on. We have to keep going. This is super strange. Let's just keep going. And so he's driving. I'm doing that sort of thing. I don't know how he's driving, but we keep going until we hit, and all these lights are flashing. We hit a barrier, and it feels like going throughout a bubble, like leaving a bubble. Like, imagine you're in a balloon, and you go through a balloon, and you push, and pop, you're out. You're out. And then you look back, and it's nothing, right? Like, so we do that, and then we pull off to a rest area, gather our bearings, and talk about it. And we said, we just, in the telepathic communication, we just have to keep going till we're out, basically. And that's it. So after that, we talked about it and we said, what happened? How is that even possible? And we came to the conclusion that we must have been drugged at that psychedelic diner, right? There must have been like LSD on the phone. And then we somehow consumed it, and then this experience happened, and there we are. I have done psychedelics and plant medicine since then, and this is nothing like that whatsoever. There's not a sense of like that missing time, not a sense of out of control, not a sense of telepathic communication and things like that. So we talk about it. We agree. We come to the consensus, the agreement that the idea that we were drugged is the most agreeable answer to what just happened, and that was that. And then we didn't talk about it until for 12 years, 15 years, something like that, until I had this experience with this client who was reading John Mack and had a very similar experience, and it jarred a memory, and I go, oh my God, flashback memory. But it's such a beautiful thing because my brother was able to talk to me about it. I said, hey, Bill, what do you remember about our drive outside of Minneapolis? He's like, wow, that was crazy. We got drugged. I remember seeing there was this dog witch at the barrier. Dog witch, right? Like it was both a dog and a witch, and it was like very insistent that that is actually what he saw, both a dog and a witch at the same time. And so this is what screen memory is, in a sense. So there's not a lot more information there. At this point in time in my life, I know that regression is a dreamlike experience, that I'm actually relating to my intuition and knowledge and psychic faculties about perceiving those information rather than remembering. So it's not necessarily worthwhile for me to like do a regression. I was like, I'll just work with this client, see where that goes, see what else jars up. And so the sense I have, the intuition that tuned into is that that it was a mass abduction, actually. There's something very similar in our experience, a sort of mass abduction of people in cars outside of cities. And they brought a whole bunch of people in. They did some sort of universal kind of generic test. Most of the people were paralyzed. Most of the people were not aware of the experiences. But the opportunity, this client remembers, standing up and out of his car and going, what is going on? All these other people are paralyzed. And so the feeling I have is that this was either an experiment in consciousness on the parts of the ETs to humans, or it was an activating experience, right? This is a sort of initiatory consciousness experience that invites a sort of conviction. I will never be paralyzed again like that in these experiences. That's what came up in my heart when I worked with this client. I said, I've had that experience. I'm never going to be paralyzed in that way. I have the capacity to develop my own meditation practice. I have the capacity to develop my own psychic gifting. I have the capacity to cut through those easy agreements and the easy screen memories that this was a dog witch instead of an extraterrestrial being that had a reason to communicate with me and my brother, right? I'm cutting through that. And I'm inviting you to cut through that too. Whenever there's screen memory stuff, right? Like let's understand that those are conveniences for development, right? They aren't nefarious, right? That's what my whole communication says to me. That's what my whole heart says. It's not necessarily, at least in my case, because there are other cases that are much more nefarious, and we should talk about that at another time. But in my case, actually, the screen memories were not aggressive. They were a simple agreement on my part. It is, you cannot be hypnotized unless you want to be. As a hypnotist, I can tell you that. Part of me really wanted that. Part of me really didn't know what was going on. I was not comfortable with a multidimensional reality breaking into my 3D world. That, and in a way that I couldn't understand. Like, that's a very difficult thing to be with. But when you practice meditation, when you engage with these practices, when you tune into your own human innate faculties that we've been documenting for thousands of years before writing, then it's not that big of a deal, and you don't need that agreement out of convenience that something kind of weird happened. You kind of went through this liminal space experience. So that was my time at 19 with screen memories. And again, thank you for being with me as I journey through my own history. And thank you for receiving these like a dream experience, right? In this case, I would actually suspect that there is likely going to be many more reports, and I haven't looked into it, about outside of Minneapolis when I was 19 on a road trip, right? I would suspect other people have experiences then and around then very similar, primarily because of the intuition of it being a mass abduction type experience. All right, we're getting close to the end, actually, of the history, but the next major experience was telepathic communion. So telepathic communion might be described as a sort of meeting of minds. And so what happened was I started engaging in meditation practice. I started doing out-of-body experience, astral projection. I had a tremendous amount of contact in that experience. And I'm not going to go into that because it's not relevant to the ET contact or the alien abduction narratives that I really want to talk about in this time. So I go to the National Aquarium in Washington, D.C., and I have the day, I'm walking around, I'm just sort of checking things out. And one of the experiences I have, is like acclimating myself to strangeness, right? Like, it's like, because I know the dream stuff is highly strange, the contact experience I have there is highly strange. So I want the physicalized experience of a strange encounter. And so I'm walking through the aquarium, and I get to like the jellyfish wing. There's all these aquariums with jellyfish, and I start walking, and it's very labyrinthine. It's like a labyrinth. Nobody is there. Nobody is there. It's just me and the jellyfish. And I keep walking. And I find this room that nobody's in. But there's this cuttlefish sort of floating at eye level in the aquarium, and it's flashing, and I go, oh, okay, this is why I'm here. I'm here to have a communication with this being. And so my conscious mind thought I was acclimating myself to strangeness, right? And it was like really very much aligned with the notion that there might be communications coming forward. And I remember being there. I watched all the flashing of the cuttlefish. There felt to be an immense communication at a subconscious level. So not with words, but with imagery, with feeling, with sentiment, with vibration. And then I had that experience, and then I left. That was it. But it was so significant to me that I started to tell people I had a telepathic communion with a cuttlefish in the National Aquarium, until I realized that nobody believed me, that it was really hard to communicate the potency of the experience. I ended up writing and illustrating a watercolor book called The Mysteries of Babylon, which you can get to on the website, cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/message. So that's the Mysteries of Babylon. And it's like a 60-hour kind of endeavor to write this story that is very strange. I still don't conceptually know what it means, but it somehow communicates that message, and it has imagery of Sumeria, of genetic manipulation, of like celestial imagery. The cuttlefish is a huge part of it. It's a strange work. I don't really know what to do with it even yet. But it's so significant. And after that, in fact, I wrote 6 small illustrated books, very similar, where I received a download information. It's sort of channeled from a very similar source, same source perhaps, and expressed in a much more coherent way that starts with the alchemist's dream is now achieved. We've got a book called Unrealizing Divine Identity, the history and epilogue to the world, the preface and epilogue of the history of the world. You can get to that at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/message, or else you can see me reading these illustrated books on video and the Message in Word and Image playlist on the Cosmic Dream Sanctuary YouTube channel. That actually was a very significant event for me, because after that, maybe when I was in my mid-30s or late 20s, excuse me, I did a master's degree in East-West psychology, and I studied shamanism, and I went to an event by Michael Harner, one of his last public workshops, that taught about the basics of core shamanism and the shamanic state of consciousness. I get back home and I feel a presence, the hair on the back of my head stands up. I go, okay, let's talk. And in the shamanic state, I start drumming like I was taught in the workshop, and a being that's very much like a cephalopod, very much like the cuttlefish, shows up and says, I'm you from the future, basically. And it's like, I'm you, but also from the future, a different timeline. And I showed up in the past to have this communication. I'll show up again to have this communication, that kind of thing. And so that was actually an explanation of the telepathic source. This is actually really relevant to that branching pattern of a starseed I mentioned earlier with the reptilian. I still didn't put the pieces together until very recently, 2 years ago or so. A friend of ours came in to town, serendipitously, more or less, who had an experience with Pleiadians that were not Nordic style Pleiadians. They were something like jellyfish. And she said, I went on the ship. It was all in journey space. It was all in a journey space, mental space, but it was very, very real. So she was communicating this information about, oh, they're not just Nordics, right? Not just Nordic, beautiful white people, which seems to me to be something like a racist projection, actually, when we talk about ET contact like dreams, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's really important to talk about ET contact like dreams, so we don't alienate people, right? From saying, oh, okay, it's like these are multidimensional beings, right? That are expressing themselves in mind and in physical world in a way that's relevant to us. So we have to pay attention to that before we start saying the only good aliens are like Nordics from Pleiades. That's ridiculous. It's more relevant that the presentation is for you, not for the world. It's for your kindness, for your gentle experience, right? So they had this communication with this woman, our friend. I said, we're something more like jellyfish. We don't communicate that. When I received that information from her, I went, oh my goodness, that's the source. That's the cuttlefish. That's the shamanic contact. This makes sense. And it helped me understand what was going on. And there was realization that the solar beings, the beings that live inside of that ancient sun, which within the Pleiades, are sort of this cephalopodic kind of branching pattern type creature, right? They project out through space and time and sometimes manifest in the like light ship kind of humanoid, tall, Pleiadian experience, but most of the time they're actually still present within that sun, right? And they're present here, they're present in the reptilian, but the source of it, you can actually trace it back, and I've traced it back, through imagery, through dream, all the way back to that experience, and it's still there. It's still projecting out. That is some level of my deeper reality, is as a solar being in a sun in the Pleiades that have seen the rise and fall of several Pleiadian extraterrestrial civilizations. And again, this sounds ridiculous, but it is the reason why I invite you to encounter this story like a dream. And the reason why I'm sharing these dreamlike stories is not necessarily for you to believe me that all these ridiculous things have happened to me, or that I'm a star in a distant star cluster or something like that, but rather it is an invitation and a way for you, an offering for you to expand your own mind, to say, what are you, right? Like, you might be so many different things, right? The sense is there's a wide range of possibilities. And I'm saying this as someone who has studied the Western liberal arts, East-West psychology. I've read a tremendous amount of testimony about these things. And there's a huge spectrum of possibility. It's not just alien abduction. It's not just greys that take your sperm or eggs. It's not just reptilians that want to eat your life force. It's not just Nordics that are beautiful white people. It is a tremendous amount of diversity. It's literally like an ocean out there. And you have the possibility of relating to all of these things in dreamlike ways. And that's why I'm sharing these stories. Keeps going. We're only at an hour and 8 minutes in this recording, and so thank you for having this sense of being present with yourself and exploring these things. I want to now talk about my experiences in my 30s. I felt really drawn to these experiences. I felt really drawn. It drove me to my course of study, my professional trainings, but I was still wiffle waffling. I didn't know how to relate to it. And this is no more apparent to me than in my own dream context. So I came to the conclusion, basically, after studying meditation, that psychic things, psi phenomena, are very, very real. They're very real. And that you can develop them like we have developed our physical technologies. So in the West, we really care about progression and technological advance and things like that. In the East, right, like thinking about Tibetan Buddhists, right, they care more about mental states, and they have actually a technology that is based in multiple lifetimes of psi phenomena and things like that. And you can encounter that by practicing with them, by talking to them about their stories. There's very credible stories of levitation, of psychic communication, of bilocations, of emanation forms, of communicating through space and time. All sorts of stuff is really possible. And I said, this is how it works. We're not looking for gigantic SETI style radio communications. We're not looking for Apollo style rockets through space. This isn't Star Trek or Star Wars. This is based in mind. This is more like dreaming than anything else. This is more like meditation than anything else. So if it is the case, right, that psi phenomena are real, and it is real, we do see that in scientific studies. It's slightly more than chance, significantly more than chance for our general population. That's us here and now in the Western world, technologically slaves to technology, slaves to these notions, right? We're still performing slightly better than chance at telepathy games, which is significant. It shows that it actually does work, right? So extrapolate that, use your mind. This is the invitation. Like, no one's going to do this for you, especially from our institutions. They're not going to say, hey, there's an alternative, natural way to communicate, to travel, to explore the stars. They say they actually want to funnel money into the harvesting of our earth for resources and the destruction of those in creating technologies that actually are not of service to us as a people. The people who are in control of that, the corporations actually that are in control of it, the empire that's in control of it, or used to be in control of it, has an interest in keeping you away from that simple extrapolation of that data, that we're psychic beings, right? That it's too obvious once you see it, but you have to see it. You have to explore. You have to be open to the sense of not knowing what is going on. That's totally fine. You can do that by practicing being present with your breath, because you never know what you're going to feel like next moment, but you can practice being present with what arises, whatever that is, through meditation practice. It's as simple as that. Anyways, I came to the conclusion, right? If they're out there, I can contact them. They can contact me. They might have already done so through dreams. And so I would engage in dream practices to invite contact with extraterrestrial beings, right? Extraterrestrial civilizations. And every time I reached out, they reached back, and it freaked me out. It freaked me out every single time. I was like, I can't deal with this. I would shut down. I'd stop engaging in my dream practices, or almost even my art practices, right? I would devote myself to like web development or something like that would create a sense of distraction, because I couldn't deal with it. I didn't want to deal with the possibility that I actually had contact through dreams with a psychic extraterrestrial civilization, right? That's a huge thing. I ended up being guided on a journey throughout the United States, through Europe, to encounter different places and different energies. And I ended up seeing UFOs and being like, oh my God, that's too freaky, based on dream and based on my contact experience, based on my invitation I sent out. They would just do a little bit beyond my imagination or expectation, a little bit beyond my comfort zone, not completely, but just beyond enough that I have to I step back, I have to process it. And I didn't actually completely process it until I aligned my motivations with service to others. Until I said, this is really something like a bodhisattva activity for me. My religious vow is to be of service to others as a bodhisattva. That's really what my religious vow is Mahayana Buddhism. That's what my religion is. It's actually a philosophy. That's totally fine. It's a non-theistic philosophy, so there's no real beliefs. There's just practice and philosophy. But that's what I am. That's who I am. And so I said, I'll bring that on, bring my work in alignment with that. I want to be of service to others. The best way I can do that is by applying my professional training as a hypnotist, my education in East-West psychology to this field. That's what I want to do. Then that actually helps me get through that resistance going, oh my God, ETs are real, right? Like it helped me. And I said, it's not a big deal in the way that I thought it was. It's just strange and awkward. And it pushes you up against the wall of comfort zone all the time. So unless there's a really strong motivation to go through it, and I say everyone actually can have that strong motivation to be of benefit, to be of service to others. I would say actually it's very beneficial for us to make contact in this way, to expand our perceptions, because it expands us out of the 3 dimensions, the 3D. It really, really does. It expands us into these dream realms that have multidimensional reality to them. And it gives us a different narrative to relate to the earth. Right? It gives us a different narrative to relate to the earth. But you have to actually work through that sense of discomfort, the sense of being freaked out by the response to your invitation, right? Like you reached out to psychic extraterrestrial beings that have light ships, and it's a surprise that you see UFOs in the sky and they show up in your dreams, and they show up through synchronicity and through your friends telling you things, channeled messages, these sort of multimodal contact moments, right? That's freaky to not just in the sky. Oh, I could deal with that, but in my heart, in my mind, and also messages coming through other people. It almost sounds like a mental illness kind of experience, but it's not. It's really a demonstration of the higher order of their consciousness that we are actually and truly invited to recognize is already present within the human experience, right? And so we're dealing with just dreams here and narratives around ET contact, right? Do we want to hold the Steven Spielberg Hollywood style understanding of what alien abduction is, or do we want to actually go into what your experience is, what my experience is, and what is possible? Great. So I went back and forth with the dream contact. I did see UFOs. It freaked me out. I did have contact in my dreams. It freaked me out. And like I was saying, I said a prayer to be of service to others in alignment with my desire and destiny, in alignment with my professional education and training. And I encountered the work of CE5 very definitely. In fact, as soon as I said the prayer, a voice in my head said, Google CE5 Revelstoke, follow what's there. I did. I met a contactee that wanted regression hypnosis. We've had a beautiful experience. Out of that has come the work I've done with the Book of Galactic Lights. The Cosmic Dream Sanctuary is coming out of that. So there's really a sense of fruition in terms of my path and my practice after having said that prayer, after having seen examples actually of CE5. Even though I was doing human initiated contact work in my dream work 5-10 years ago, right? Before it was cool, that sort of thing. I didn't actually have an example that was effective for me. And the CE5 work, the Stephen Greer work, even though there are challenges related to that narrative in the media, it served as an example that said, hey, everyday people are getting together, activating their own capacities of meditation, reaching out, ET reaches back. and it's not a big deal. It's part of life now. And so that really is what happened to me recently within, it was about a year and a half or 2 years ago now. And since then, I've been exploring dream world. I've been exploring the ET contact. I've been supporting people in hypnosis, in regression hypnosis. Even though I keep saying we have to interpret this stuff like a dream, it really is beneficial to go into those experiences, to have those experiences, right? And just like a dream, we know that there are multiple different dimensions, that there is the capacity for extremely vast psi phenomenon to occur when we relate to it like a dream. And it's very important to do so, and not as a historical memory, because that leads to confusion, that leads to objective issues, right? That leads to flattening down a very multidimensional experience into facts that are actually not relevant to anyone's experience. So that's my experience. I did see, I've seen tremendously beautiful UFO like motions in the sky, combined with like telepathic messages, combined with other messages, other experiences and things like that. And I'm very grateful for it. It's less of an issue for me now. It's sort of like, oh, it's them in the sky. That's fine. And that's not actually the point. The point isn't to see the UFOs. The point is to expand the consciousness into the understanding that we are something more like that wave than the particle, right? Someday soon, we'll be able to shift up into that wave form and back into the particle form, and we'll call that teleportation, right? And somewhere in between, that might look like a light ship that sends off geometric patterns in the dreaming mind of those underneath, something like that. And that's perhaps the experience from one perspective that's that's happening now. So again, that's really where I'm at with those experiences. I do acknowledge their reality. I am actively working to engage my intellectual mind, my religious experience, my intellectual mind, my professional life, to accommodate these multidimensional dreamlike experiences into the reality of our everyday life. And that's the work I'm doing here with Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. So I am getting a little ahead of these bottom of the video statements, headlines. So that's really where I'm at now, is service to others. I would invite you to play with that intention in your own life, that your own motivation, to realize that whatever experiences you've had, right, it is beneficial for you to go through to kind of decharge, right? There's going to be a charge of discomfort, of ontological shock, of freak out, right? There's freak out experience, like, oh my God, I can't think about that right now. But it's actually very, very helpful for you to go through those experiences and to talk about them. So that's the invitation here, is to understand these are something like a dream, understand that dreams are sometimes nightmarish, right? Sometimes you don't want to deal with them. But actually, if you do apply insight and intention to your nightmare experiences, you can experience a transformation. And this is very important to realize, right? Like there's a paper out there that talks about how to use lucid dream practices to help people with psychosis, right? Understand the nature of their reality, understand what is delusion and what is not, right? So you can do that work by applying understanding to your dream-like experience now, your dream-like experiences, and then invite an intention to understand them, to connect, so that you can be of benefit, so that you can be present, so that you can share your story in a way that is beneficial and meaningful to our world in general, right? So thank you for doing that. We're coming to the end of this experience, and I do have some conclusions. These are like working hypotheses that I want to share based on all of these experiences. Life is like a dream. So that is the core message here. And this isn't to say that life is unreal or flimsy or anything like that. It is like a dream, meaning that there is a deeper unifying consciousness field to what feels distinct. So just like you are attached to your dream body in the nightmare and are terrified of the nightmare monster that's going to get you, but that when you wake up to the dreamlike nature of that reality, you discover you are actually the dream character you were attached to, and the monster that you were scared of, right? So in the same way, we're invited to realize that we are both the physical body here, the egoic mind, and this thin layer of conceptual ego, basically, and we're so much more. And we might actually be, in some way, shape, or form, those nightmare monsters that visit us in UFOs or my lab experiences, just like I did with that reptilian being that served an empire, that was in service to the military in this dreamlike experience. It was in service to the military. It was in service to the empire. But I discovered through that dreamlike experience that we had a shared source of like soul origin, which was that solar consciousness, which is that solar consciousness in the Pleiades. So there's a sense of that. That's a very real kind of dreamlike narrative that I'm sharing. It is a dreamlike experience. I'm not saying that I'm a reptilian, I don't know, I was like a reptilian from Alpha Centauri and a Pleiadian sun and a human being, right? Like it's very clear that I am a human being named Daniel Philip Rekshan, inhabiting the year 2022, talking to you over internet, right? That's who I am. But the narrative and the deeper soul identity narrative dreamlike thing pointed to that unification. And that's actually given me enough capacity to tune into some of the darker aspects of our human existence here and now. So it's a benefit in that way. So life is like a dream. Another conclusion here is consciousness is primary and life is like a dream. So life is very real. It's just that there's a deeper story and there's a mind coordinating those events, right? So that's the hypothesis that I'm inviting you to explore. ET contact invites a deeper connection or awareness of the superconscious realms, right? So that's really important to understand, is that we are not we cannot expect to take the conscious waking reality realm, the realm of historical facts and objective science. All of those are illusions anyways. They're illusions of the egoic mind, which is the source of suffering that we understand in Buddhism. But it invites an understanding that something is happening above and below that egoic, intellectual, conceptual mind, right? And in that way, it's dreamlike. Another conclusion, hypnotic regression is a misleading term because the memories of experience may not be experienceable in ordinary waking consciousness, right? So that's very important to understand. Just like, in my experience, right? Like what happened, right? Like we might be taken up and out of the consciousness might be taken up and out of the physical body. The physical body might be there, or the physical body might be in the ship or whatever. I don't know. But to expect that hypnotic regression will lead to memories, physicalized memories of historical events, this is actually a sort of expectation that everything is particles in the world and there's not this sort of quantum in between of particle and wave, which we know is the reality. It's both particle and wave sort of thing. But hypnotic regression, for the sake of evidence, is assuming that everything's a particle, and the world just falls apart when we hold that notion. Any preconceived notion or stereotype of alien or ET contact will never fit the actual experience, because the experience involves more than the conceptual mind and the physical body. So that's really important to understand too, is that we are actually engaged in something that is new and unfolding. We aren't engaged in something that's old and not unfolding. So the mind, the intellectual mind, really wants to put things in lists, and check boxes and historical facts. So it really wants to go, I was abducted by gray aliens who took my sperms when I was 14 for the purpose of evil empire, right? That's what it wants to do. That's what the intellectual mind actually wants to do. And that sort of thing, that checklist coincides with like narratives that are being offered by our media. But actually, that's not the case. I'm discovering an ongoing relationship with beings that are something more like waveforms than physical bodies, that oftentimes express through the guise of physicalized forms that we may recognize through the stereotypes of gray aliens. But they're not. That's not what they are. They could be anything else. Right? It's easy enough for them to go into that waveform and then come out as something else, right? And that's really kind of an ontological shock to our mind. But the faster we accommodate that experience in our own experience, the faster we resolve the issues we're experiencing in society. It has been more effective for me to grow and develop my own consciousness than to try and remember historical or physical events. So in the same way, right, the invitation is to understand these as dreams, right? I could try to remember exactly what happened, or I could develop my capacity as a meditator and a dreamer. And that for me is much more effective, right? The understanding that, wow, I may actually never be able to have a physicalized memory of what happened to me when I was 3 years old, because there might not ever be a physical body associated with that memory. But, right, there might be a psychic communication that is very easily accessible should I shift my notion that it needs to be a physicalized historical memory coming up, to the notion that I can develop my capacities here and now to perceive more than the historical moment that's unfolding right now. And therefore expand my capacities to see what happened then, what is happening, what will happen, that sort of thing. And finally, I want to just say I am immensely hopeful about our situation and about ET contact, especially when I understand that there is a deeper unifying field of consciousness that is our truest nature, right? These aren't others. These are not visitors. These are not others. These are not visitors. We are not what we imagine we are. We are actually the deeper level of consciousness that is experiencing one aspect as a human being and another aspect as these aliens or extraterrestrials. They're not other, right? Just like those nightmare creatures, monsters in nightmares are not other than you, right? They are actually you, right? The distinction between the body in your dream and all the characters, right? They feel really different when you're in the dream. But when you come and awaken, you discover, wow, actually you're both of those things. The whole thing is really, really, really different than what you might imagine. Nobody's here to come and rape and pillage and steal our resources. Nobody's here to have that ongoing abduction experience or victimization, so long as, when you tune into the deeper reality, oftentimes we do get stuck in these cycles of victimization, victimizer, this, that, self, other, but that's invitation to go deeper within yourself to healing, insight, and transformation. That is not that experience of being a victim of alien abduction, that experience of feeling terrified of the cosmic other coming to steal our resources. This is an illusion, and that illusion invites you to heal, to go on a journey of healing, to identify with the deeper reality that you know is present within your body, right? So in that way, it is immensely important, because if we don't, if we don't, what happens in dream experience, right? Like what actually happens? Take a moment. Like if you don't wake up from the nightmare, you have a terrible experience. If you don't wake up to the dreamlike nature of the nightmare, you have a terrible experience. But eventually you do wake up. So I personally have been fed up with the nightmarish experience of what is happening in our society. And I'm choosing to identify with all of it, right? The others, the visitors, the evil empire, the covert humans, the MyLabs, whatever. Those are just silly little distinctions at this very thin layer of egoic, personal, intellectual consciousness, right? And if that thing can have the habitual patterns to open up just a little bit, it can realize that there's so much more, and that there is a great reason to hope, because ultimately we are expressive of the creative force of the universe, that we live in a multidimensional, multimodal, multi-universal reality, right? And that we can shift our behavior patterns in an exponential or almost quantum way, just like those beings can shift from waveform expression and light ship to the physicalized form that we oftentimes see them. We can do that too. It's very, very hopeful. So that's the message I have. That's what I've got. And once again, thank you for being with me as I have this communication. If this spoke to you, like I would love to hear your own stories. I love hearing stories. That's one of the best things in my work is I do hypnosis, right? So I do hypnosis with people. And one of my favorite things is the consultation. I offer them free and no obligation. All my work is by donation, but I offer them free and no obligation. And they always start out with me going, I know you've probably not had a lot of time to talk about these things. I'm a safe space. I love listening. I love hearing the stories. Just lay it on me. What's going on? And generally, it's like a 30-minute to a 2-hour conversation oftentimes of the most extraordinary things. And I just absolutely love hearing them. So if anything resonated with you, if there's any points of like, wow, that happened to me too, reach out. If there's anything that you have an experience of that you find that my perspective would be of service to you, right, in this experience, if you resonate with the notion that hypnotic regression isn't memory, but is psychic development, right? Like all those things, reach out. We can work together, and it's good work, actually. It's beneficial to the world. So once again, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being present and listening to this story. Feel free to share it. Feel free to reach out. And yep, much love to you. I'll see you later.